All right, everybody, Jan 14th. I can't even remember what episode number this is. So that's a
12.
good sign. It's
12.
12? There we go, 12. You reminded me.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody
Yeah,
to
we only had one last week.
yeah. Welcome everybody to GTMN.fm. And we are going to do something slightly different this week. Austin pinged me over the weekend and he's like, "Hey, I have a lot of attribution questions for you. And should we just talk about that for a little bit on the next time we record?" So we're going to start with a few attribution questions that Austin has top of mind. And actually, Austin, you have some news. Are you willing to talk about your news publicly or not yet?
Yeah. And I promise to people listening, this is not a sneaky way for Pranav to shill Paramark on everybody. Um, I actually brought the questions that we're going to talk about today on my own. For people who don't know, I spent like the first 5 to 7 years of my career in mobile attribution. I was an early employee of this company called Branch. And then the first consulting agency I built was almost exclusively focused on companies that were trying to stand up a whole set of tools to do marketing, but mostly mobile marketing. So even though I now consider myself a B2B guy, I spent a huge portion of my career, probably 3 or 4 years, working with companies to set up tools for B2C. And so you can imagine like you're either an enterprise or whatever, and you have a mobile app and you're trying to advertise that mobile app. And so you might have web ads alongside app ads. That is the attribution that I want to talk about today. Now, there's a lot of stuff that is related to enterprise, B2B, or B2B2C attribution, but some of this is tech oriented. And the reason this connects back to the other thing you brought up is I have 2 new things I'm working on this month. One is I'm working in a fractional role at this company called A2B as their CMO, which is pretty fun.
Congrats. Woo.
And then I'm also working with this company that people might have tried before called Replit, which is pretty cool. Now, I'm not going to reveal kind of who's who in these set of questions and what people are talking about. But what's interesting is outside of these, folks that I'm working with, I've had maybe 6 founders this month come to me with the questions that we're going to talk about today. So I'm formulating my own opinion and I have a lot to share. But I think the point of this conversation is to have an open dialogue with Pranav and I about it. And then maybe in a month or two, we can reconvene and talk about what we've learned because I'm going to be going on this adventure for the next month and trying to come up with a playbook. And the reason I think this is important is because if you rewind back to 2017, there was a pretty discrete playbook for mobile marketing. And I can't find that anymore. Or maybe if it exists, there's only one person in the world who knows it. So my job is hopefully to enlighten some folks who are having these problems and build a playbook out of it. So that is the context of this conversation and why we're trying something new this week.
All right, awesome. So we'll talk about the questions that you have, Austin. Congrats again on this the 2 new roles. I had to get a clap into that.
Oh
So and let's get straight into it, and then we'll cover a couple of interesting items that happened this last week. I think the direct offer stuff from Google in AI mode is pretty timely. So we'll cover that at the end. But tell me what you had in mind. We haven't prepped much about this. I think I saw a list of questions like this morning from you. So let's just dive in.
Let's roll through it. Okay. So context. This is specific to companies who are spending quite a lot on advertising. So call it 20 million plus in mobile ads and web ads. If you're a mobile app company, spending less than 20 million, it might apply, but I would argue like you might not go to such extents as we're talking about. And I'm also talking about companies that have a mobile ad attribution platform. I might interchange that with the company called AppsFlyer just out of habit. I work with AppsFlyer for it, but there are other companies like Branch and Adjust. So I'm not necessarily giving away vendor requests there. The first thing I want to talk about is I use this term all the time called deterministic attribution,
Yep.
which is to say, hey, I know exactly who clicked the ad. I know their phone size, their screen size, their operating ID. I know their IDFA. Question for you, Pranav. Is that type of deterministic attribution dead, alive, or on life support?
Good question. Well, I don't think it is dead. I do think it is misunderstood and maybe misused, but it's not dead. And the first thing to sort of clarify is, and this I hate to have a semantics conversation, but I think it's important just to kind of
Good.
set the stage very quickly. When you use the word attribution, what do you really mean?
Yeah.
If you mean cause and effect, then I don't think that the thing that we call deterministic attribution does cause and effect. So that's the irony of the label. Now, what it does do that is extremely valuable, and I think you need to have it, is telemetry or
Mhm.
tracking or whatever you want to call it, right? But like understanding the knowable parts of the journey that a certain user is going on with your mobile app, it does it. And, pick your solution, whether it's AppsFlyer or Branch or whatever else. Um, some will be slightly better at that or not, but it's not dead. It's got a very specific use case. It is over trusted by people to even the best of marketers might think that it implies causation or it implies that you can use it to do budget allocation, but those assumptions are extremely flawed. Let me pause and see if that helped.
Yes, it helps because I think that what people are trying to do is they're trying to understand how them spending money is making them money. They
Yep.
want to know where to spend money. They want to optimize, their campaigns against existing acquired customers. And that's, I think, what people fundamentally are trying to achieve when they say attribution. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, part of the problem is that there's the story, there's, hey, what am I trying to do? Then there's the kind of statistical analysis of what actually is the answer to that question. And then there is data. And data can be informative in answering the question,
Yep.
can be informative in establishing causation, but capturing data is a separate and discrete practice from attributing campaigns from answering the question. The
Precisely.
problem, though, is that executives ask the question and then operators have to go figure all this shit out on their own.
Yeah, yeah. A good analogy of this is even when you think if you go and talk to engineering teams or product teams, right? You have lots of product analytics, you have lots of engineering analytics, right? You get reports about, hey, this thing is broken or this, event is firing or whatever is going on. But none of that should be used just in isolation to understand whether a certain feature is driving more upsell or retention or usage of the product. You actually have to do something on top of that data. So the same thing applies to the, mobile, all the MMPs, the apps flyer and such, where you're collecting the event stream, you're collecting all the data, but you have to do something above that and beyond that to then make sense of that data to say, is there a statistically valid relationship between those data points and whatever metric that you're trying to optimize?
Yep. So we've established that, first of all, there might be an expectation problem.
Yep.
And the reason I want to start with this is because I would say like 80% of the founders or marketing members I talk to have the wrong expectations about how to answer their question and also have the wrong expectations about what telemetry can even provide for them. This gets back to the start of the conversation around deterministic attribution. And I won't as much ask a question as pose to the audience a little bit of history, which is to say, back in the day, 2015, 2016, deterministic data worked on the web in the similar way that it works on mobile. There was technology that was developed that allowed you to do this. On web, it's easy. You click on a link, there's UTMs in the link, or there's a pixel in the link, a UTM that gets captured by a pixel link. You visit a website, JavaScript fires and captures that data and ties it to an anonymous ID. And then when you log in, that anonymous data gets associated with your known data. So like web tracking has always worked the same. I would say the only change is that now browsers are stripping UTMs. Browsers are blocking SDKs, which effectively are pixels. Pixels are just mini SDKs that get injected usually by Google Tag Manager. So if, say, in 2000, you could capture 100% of traffic, today I think it's probably closer to 60% of traffic, maybe less. You tell me what you've seen.
No, that's exactly right. There's one other piece, which is obviously, your browsers are doing all types of things to make it harder, but then there's also compliance. So you've got GDPR, CCPA, all of
Yes.
these things. So you now have cookie banners, which everybody hates. I don't think that's a good answer to this problem, but that means that even Google Analytics will not load if people do not accept those cookies if you're doing it in a compliant manner. So
Yeah.
by definition, you're losing a bunch of tracking because of those compliance issues as well.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the industry standard is. I remember at Ramp, we measured and we kind of came up with the answer that, like, hey, we're only going to be getting probably 70% of people.
Mm.
And that was in the continental US, not including GDPR. So, like, let's just assume the best tracking, deterministic tracking on web is say 70% of your real audience. Now you look at mobile, again, back in the day, mobile was a
Yeah.
lot closer to 100%. You have this thing called fingerprinting, which is where if you're on your iPhone, you click a link, it does like a little redirect. It's basically taking a JavaScript snapshot of the web browser, and then you download the app. One of these mobile app attribution providers would open up a hidden browser window, and they try to retrieve the same set of parameters. And like, say you have IP, phone size, screen size, color, named Austin's iPhone, and within a 2-minute period, you see the same parameters. Well, then you can match those two and say, oh, the person we saw on the web browser and the person in a web ad and the person we see in the app for the first time with the same set of parameters, well, those are the same people. And at the time, there was this thing called an IDFA, and it's an identifier for advertisers from Apple. Google has something similar called the GAID. You could tie that cookie pair match to one of these IDs, and then whenever you see somebody on web, you kind of know who they are in the app. That was the way that it used to work. Back in 2018, Apple introduced this thing called SKAdNetwork, which effectively said, hey, there will still be a way for you to track people using this methodology, but you have to pop up a little browser window or a little, tile that says, do you allow people to explicitly track you? That's called ATT. If you don't use that, you can still get data about your campaigns, but it's on a campaign level. So rather than saying like, hey, I know that Austin came from this Reddit campaign and Pranav came from that Google campaign, we just know that we had two people and one came from each campaign and we don't know who they are. So that, I'm butchering
Yep.
it a lot, but that's the basis of SKAdNetwork. So I'm kind of curious because you've probably seen a lot of this data. Does SKAdNetwork even really work? Because I have only heard complaints in the 5 years or now 6 years since it came out that people cannot get it to work. Like I have yet to encounter a company in the wild that's like, yes, we've implemented SKAdNetwork and like we're getting great campaign data.
No, no, I think you're 100% right. I think everyone in the mobile world, and it's funny because 2020 and 2021, when this actually came out, I was at a company called Invoice to Go, which was a mobile app. And we were spending millions of dollars on mobile advertising across pretty much everything that you can imagine. And we had to struggle with this ourselves. And I had a really strong media buyer on mobile, Pat Radka, shout out to Pat, who figured out, ways of hacking around it. But SKAdNetwork did not help. So it wasn't like the solution. The solution was doing really squinting at the data and go like, when you increase spend, what is happening on the other side and doing it, back then I was a noob to incrementality. So we hadn't implemented any of that stuff, but we were essentially doing a poor man's version of incrementality to understand when you make these changes to your media mix, what happens on the other side, and be patient, give it time, because we understood that the tracking was quite broken.
Yeah.
And everyone went through the same exact journey. I'll make a couple of points here. So on fingerprinting, whether it's mobile fingerprinting, whether it's, desktop fingerprinting, it is actually quite statistical and probabilistic. So it's not
Yes.
deterministic
Well,
because
it's only deterministic if basically based on IP.
yeah. And when you go and talk to all the attribution providers, they'll tell you we can do all types of fingerprinting because, like that's their spiel, I get it. But if you go and talk to Google, if you go talk to Apple, you go talk to Windows, the operating system teams, they will tell you they are constantly fighting fingerprinting methodologies. So why is that? Because number one, from a compliance perspective, it is not user consented. So Google on Android and Apple on Apple are going to be in a world of trouble if they made it easy for anybody to fingerprint and therefore give away PII. You see my point?
Mhm.
So there is no way that these attribution companies' claims are accurate, and if they are accurate, they're skirting the law to do it.
Well,
So yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, so Google has had GAID,
Mhm.
and you can collect GAID, and the rules as I remember is like you're allowed to do this for your own first party data, but there were a lot of limitations about then sending that data to other places. But the reality is that everybody was doing it. The bigger thing though that's comforting to hear is like, hey, getting SKAdNetwork to work is really hard.
Yep.
Most people can't do it easily. This gets to like maybe another question, which I'm curious if you've seen is so now you can still get deterministic data for mobile. So let's like focus on mobile for a second. The cases where you get deterministic data is like, hey, I'm in my home on a dedicated IP address and I have a unique device, a unique cell phone, and I'm clicking on a link and I'm not on a VPN or anything like that. And I'm downloading the app within a very short number of seconds or minutes.
Sure.
You could get deterministic data in the old world. You can probably maybe get deterministic data now as long as you're clicking the ATT banner that says I
Yep.
consent to letting you collect my IDFA. But even if you consent to letting somebody collect your IDFA, there's still tons of cases where what you said is so important, which is like you're always going to have probabilistic mismatch. And if, like, for example, you're at a conference center, you're on a shared IP, you're driving your car, you're walking between cell networks.
It's even simpler than that, actually. I'll give you one example. Let's say
Mhm.
you went on a run this morning. Maybe that's a bad example because you're using your phone, but maybe you commuted to work, right? And you were on a work device while in transit or what have you, and you were just scrolling, your X feed. I know you're not an X user, but whatever, Substack feed, and you saw an ad. Substack doesn't have ads, but they should. You see an ad for something, and you're like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," but you're busy in your work or whatever, so you don't do anything. And then you get back into your work, your personal network. You come back home, you open your mobile phone, you search for the thing, you click on the first thing, and that ends up being a branded ad on Apple, and you install. So deterministically, it looks like that branded ad did a lot of work for you,
Yeah.
but it has no knowledge of the fact that you scrolled Substack on a different device on a different network just 3
Yes.
hours ago.
There are both the technical reasons why you can have misalignment of campaign data, and then there are the human elements of why you can have misaligned data.
Yep.
And I think, where I'm leading in this conversation is if the theme could be summarized, it's like a lot to do about nothing, which is to say, a lot of people stress and have anxiety over attribution data, quote unquote, when actually like they're going down a rabbit hole on telemetry data that won't tell them as much as other methods. And so I want to come to these other methods, like, what do you do in a world where you have very little deterministic data? Because that's basically the story that I'm starting to see emerge is just like put it in perspective, right? I went out and talked to 4 different companies in the last week. ATT attach rates are 15%, meaning
Yeah.
15% of people are clicking the banner saying you can collect my IDFA or GID. Well, in GDID, you don't have to have the banner. So on Android, like maybe you're getting 70%.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, but okay, it's 15% for iOS. We'll just be generous and say it's 90% for Android. In addition to that, you only have maybe 70% of web. You have maybe 10% of desktop. I've never seen anybody figure out desktop because part of the problem is that you need some way, again, to fingerprint the device on the browser. Now, again, there's an app install process, but it all happens on the same device. So you could be clever and figure out ways to put a dynamic key inside the DMNG file and like, try to auth them back through the web browser. So there's a way to get better desktop data, but the point is that you at best are getting fractional data about all these channels. And so the question is, we come back to is like, when do you say is enough for telemetry, or is telemetry always in pursuit of more? And
Hmm.
then, assuming you're a large growing company where there's a Series A, Series C, Series D, you have the same set of problems, which is your executive team is asking you, hey, how do we know what's working and what's not?
Yeah.
Now, I want to now shift the conversation from a world where we've talked about the fact that your ability to collect data will always be flawed. You'll never have 100%. That's like a
Hmm.
known fact. And I think the argument I'm making is you can always be in pursuit of better data, but you will never have what I would consider good data. You will only have fractional data. And you will also have a mixture of deterministic data, probabilistic data, and campaign level data. So now you have 3 different sets of data. And what I haven't seen articulated very well is like what is the analytic strategy with that
Hmm.
environment? I'm curious to kind of hear how you're
Yeah.
coaching early stage companies and later stage companies who have a lot more on the line.
Yeah. So without making it a pitch about Paramark, I'm going to try and do it in a way which is like very neutral and something that, listeners of this podcast can try and implement themselves. Firstly, when the concept of incrementality and basically what that means is like, hey, if I were to stop doing all marketing, what is the amount of my net new business that I'm going to lose? right? So if I stop doing all marketing, am I losing 10% of my net new sales or downloads or whatever your metric is? Am I losing 15%? Am I losing 20%? Am I losing 50%? That's what you're trying to get at an aggregate level. So that's the first thing. Like, understand the concept, even if you don't want to implement any of the things that I say next. Because when you understand the concept, then you know that that's the real goal. Okay. Now, I was talking to one of the hyperscalers. I won't mention who. I think you know. I think we exchanged some notes about this in our Slack, and they're struggling because they're trying to deploy a few $1 million a month on advertising across every channel possible. And they're stuck in this like rut because they have this exact same problem. They are trying to do it through a deterministic method. And that's fine because they're starting from scratch. They have nothing. And so there's a desire and a temptation to put all of this deterministic tracking in place. It feels simpler. It feels easier. You can see it, you can touch it. It's very sort of knowable. And my sort of recommendation is like, don't get tempted by the easy.
Mm.
The things that are easy to measure are going to bias you towards the following. Direct response ads on Google are going to look fantastic. Your I'll give you $50, take a demo ads on LinkedIn are going to look fantastic because those are very, very easy to measure and they show up in a very deterministic way in your models. And what you will very quickly realize is like your model is
Telemetry
going to say it again?
is like telemetry bias. Hey, the things that are
Yes.
easiest to measure will show that they're working. The
I can
things that
already tell you that, right? This is why
yeah,
70%, 80% of businesses are investing 70% or 80% of their budget on Google and Apple and the very bottom of funnel, direct response on LinkedIn and Meta and what have you. So there's a natural bias. And then when and then what will happen is you do a podcast or you do a CTV or you do, paid social that's focused on awareness, that won't show up in your deterministic models because when was the last time you clicked on a podcast ad? You can't, right? When was the last time you even remember the code that gets mentioned in those podcast ads? Barely ever. You just go and do the thing. So just be aware of that bias, even if you don't want to do anything with it. And the reason I say this is if you're aware of the bias, then you can look at this very strategically. You can have a deterministic model and you can say, hey, I increased my podcast ads by 100%. I'm now like investing 100K a month on podcast ads. And I'm seeing that my installs have gone up by 5% at the same time when I made that increase in my podcast ads. You don't need any fancy software for this. You don't need Paramark for this. You're just eyeballing and saying, when I make this change, here's the change in my output metric that is observable. And you can do this with your eyes, with your intuition, with a simple spreadsheet, especially with all the tools that are available in AI now. Where it gets hard is when you're trying to do this across podcast and TV and Meta and LinkedIn. Now you're trying to do 5 or 6 different types of big changes. And guess what? Humans suck at data analysis when it comes to eyeballing 5, 6 different patterns. We're not built for that. So that's where you need to start moving into more of the, advanced incrementality measurement type of stuff. But you don't have to get there from the get go. Start with eyeballing the data, get all of your data organized, and just say, make big changes. And when you make big changes, you should see big outcomes on the other side. If you're not, you made a 100K investment in a podcast and nothing changed in your output metric, it clearly didn't work.
yeah. Well, also people, I get it. Like we in Silicon Valley, the idea is to be data driven. But
Yeah,
I think the argument that we're pointing to is that this is kind of a fallacy, right? In a world where telemetry data is broken and not very good, and things are probabilistic, and yes, there are already a lot of co-founding factors. The simple let's go do one thing and then see what happens is actually very telling. And I think this is especially the case for small businesses. Like I would say even up to like Series B, just because like
100%.
you're not doing enough to have an impact on your marketing lead funnel. Like everybody thinks like, oh, well, what happens if it's something else?
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't something else. If you're a Series B company and nobody knows you and you go spend $100,000 or something, it will show up or it won't.
Yeah.
Now, the only claim that I would argue is sometimes comes into it is like it might not show up right away. There might be lags. And then
Correct.
yeah, that can be hard because what happens if you have 2 weeks to run this campaign, but it shows up later or over a longer period of time, if you're only looking at a 2-week horizon, you don't see it, but if you look at a 6 weeks horizon, you do. But again, this gets to the point, which is like at some point you'll start layering on these marketing motions and it becomes hard for you to untangle which of them is having the effect that you want. But again, as your marketing team grows and as your budget grows and as you're more successful, there's not going to ever be one lever to pull to make your business successful.
I'll tell you how we're tackling this at Paramark. What are we doing for Paramark's marketing? Paramark is a horrible customer of Paramark, right? Like we are not drinking our own champagne because it's applying the wrong tool to the wrong stage. So what we are doing right now is setting up our dashboards to report on the following metrics. Very, very simple. Week over week or month over month. It's our total ad spend. We only spend on one thing, which is LinkedIn, right? So it's very easy for us to do this. We're looking at total impressions and total engagements on LinkedIn week over week and month over month. So spend, impressions, engagement. We're also looking at our website traffic. We're looking at our newsletter subs, and we're looking at um, search query volume. Those 6 or 7 metrics, when you start to plot them over the last 6 months, as your LinkedIn spend goes up or down, do you see corresponding increases in those relevant metrics over time? Because we're only doing one thing at a time, it'll be dead obvious. And there you go. That's all you kind of need to do on your earlier stage. Let's add another channel. Let's add Google. We're going to probably start doing some search marketing. And we'll do the exact same thing. But when we launched search marketing, we literally had this meeting this week with our media buyer, and we said we're only going to launch that in New York. And the reason we said that is we just want to test what happens in New York. Can we just lift traffic from New York? Forget about all the other metrics. Can we lift traffic? Because if we can, then we'll be fine. If we can't even lift traffic, why are we talking about any of the other metrics? So it's a very pragmatic approach, and you do have to understand the principles of science, which is, test and control. What is a hypothesis? And a hypothesis-driven way of doing, marketing. But you don't want to get over-constrained because at our stage, the volume is pretty low and noisy. So if I try to do 5 tests at the same time, I'm just over engineering it. It's not going to work. And sometimes these experimentation platforms will sell you on this idea that you should do you can do 10 experiments this quarter. And I'm like, no, you can't. At this stage of the company, you're just trying to give a cookie cutter answer that is not reasonable for the stage of company. So what I would say is keep it very, very simple, have a very simple dashboard and reporting mechanism where you look at the 3 or 4 metrics that are important for your funnel and track them over time and see when things change on your media activities, what is the corresponding change or not in your marketing metrics. The piece about lag is very important. You have to pick the right metrics, knowing the lag between, when marketing happens, when it shows up in your metric. For us, it's quite a long lag. So we look at multiple metrics, some that are leading indicators of a future metrics.
Yeah, that's why I always find it funny when people are like, "Well, we don't want to do out of home because it's like not always easy to measure." Like just because it's not easy to measure doesn't mean it's not going to work, right?
Yeah,
And actually, a lot of times what an unstated outcome of marketing is to be recognizable, to become a beloved brand. Like every time I talk to a founder, that's what they want. Nobody's like, "Oh, I don't want to be a name brand." Like that's the value of your brand. Like there are tons of people out there that literally will economically value your brand based on, how much people love it or identify with it. But what they don't understand is that those things aren't created overnight. And also it's hard to measure because you can't put a value on a brand. So one of the things that I like to tell most teams these days is that, you shouldn't wait to start brand building until you want to have the
totally.
brand. You should do it a year, 2 years, 3 years before. And so like this becomes more of a judgment choice than a science choice.
I was listening to the founder of Kalshi. I don't know if you know Kalshi. They're
Oh,
one of
yeah.
the
Oh my gosh, they're everywhere.
they're everywhere. And he had an episode with Harry Stebbings. So it was the 20 VC podcast. And I don't think he's done any other podcasts other than that one. And what did he say? Now, this is a fairly technical person and the CEO of this company, worth whatever, I think it's a decacorn or whatever. And what did he say? He said, uh, we have dealt or thought about brand from day one. And so if you're going to build an iconic company, and he understands that, by the way, right? And their team is thinking about incrementality and better measurement and so on and so forth. And I won't reveal my sources, but they are. And the reason is because they have to make these big bets, and they understand that brand is going to take sort of a combination of amazing creative, which I think they do a pretty good job of getting out there, with amazing measurement. And so take any leading company, like, and this is the secret, right? Like, most startups think like, oh, the these deterministic attribution players are going to solve all their growth problems. What the real secret is, when you go and talk to the top 1% of growth and marketing operators, they talk a language that is completely different
100%.
and unrecognizable to the masses. And so I think people need to really invest and think from first principles about this stuff. And it's hard. Like, don't get me wrong. It is so easy and tempting to stick with the deterministic way of looking at the world, but marketing just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as I've matured in my own career, I've recognized when and where deterministic methods and telemetry are really valuable, and when classic brand building marketing is actually what you need to get to the next level. And I think, like, if you're in a world where you have a clear financial model, especially backing into CAC, yes, you want to have great telemetry and you want to do things like set up CAPI, and you can run a tight ship creating the programmatic results you want at the dollar amount you want. But if that is not your ultimate goal, if your goal is to just grow and grow quickly, or to build a brand that outlives you, those are things that are not controlled through telemetry. Those are things that are not controlled by deterministic marketing. So, I think increasingly I'm finding that you have to have a mix of both, but telemetry is not going to solve your problems. And so looking for other advanced ways of answering the question is important, as especially because I think, like, where this all leads to is that I often think CMOs are not well equipped with the language on both sides of the equation to make the
Mm,
argument to their co-founders and CEOs about why they're making choices. And so what ends up happening is you'll have a CEO that will waffle one way or the other. In one minute they want to have really robust determinist data. They ask the question like, why can't we answer this question? How do we not know where our money is going? And then they'll swing the other way violently and be like, "Oh, well, we did that brand campaign in the subways of New York, and it was like, fuck, it was amazing, and everybody was talking about it, and and they loved us." And so, I think it's important for the next generation of CMOs to basically be able to explain how each of these tool sets fits into your articulation of your strategy with your executive team.
100%. And I'm seeing the best sort of marketing organizations already do that. It's sad though, because I will say that the mass market, right, the SMBs, the majority of Series A, Series B companies just don't have the experience or the knowledge or the skill set to be able to do it. And frankly, I think the education, and I'm fast forwarding to 2 years and thinking about, if Paramark fails, why would it fail? It would fail because it was very hard to educate the whole industry on this concept. And, just being very honest and direct about this, there is an uphill battle. This is a true revolution. This is like changing hearts and minds in a way that hasn't happened in the last 2.5 decades of Meta and Google pushing on deterministic. And it's not going to be easy, but that's what makes startups fun and all that fun stuff. But the danger is very real.
100%. And yeah, I'm curious if you haven't answered this question. Maybe this is one we can round out with, and then we can move on to some news for the week. So this is a spicy take. I'm of the mindset that, like, bad data or poor telemetry is probably worse than no telemetry. And the reason I say that is because I think having poor data tends to bias people in a direction way harder than having no data and just going off of gut and instinct. Back to the start of our conversation, keeping things simple. If I pull lever A, what happens to B? When you have no telemetry data or very limited telemetry data, like you said, views, traffic, it's very easy to let go of the complication and just say, well, we're going to go spend this amount of money and we're going to see what happens. And it shows up in your North Star metric, leads generated, users, etc. I'm curious of your opinion. Is no data better than some data? And if so, when do you think that that shift occurs in a company's life cycle.
I think it's a little bit of a straw man argument because uh, there is no excuse for any company at any stage to have good data. I don't think that there is a valid argument for why, in this day and age, why you wouldn't have the right data. So I would frame it differently and say, figure out what matters for your
Mm.
business. And step number one, go instrument that right away. Like, why haven't you? And I'll give you an example, right? For us, the goal setting that we do for our go to market team is very clear. It's revenue, it's demos, and we're now working on a third metric, which is going to be some longer term metric. And likely we will end up with our opted in email database. Okay. And why do we have these three metrics? And they're not hard to instrument. Revenue is obviously easy and obvious. Demos, no MQLs, no SQLs, none of this matters. What matters is that we had somebody who is in our target market raise their hands and said, I want a demo.
Mhm.
That's the only metric that matters. So our VP of marketing is gold on the volume of metrics on a quarterly basis. And we have a cost implication. This is how much we're willing to pay for a demo. And now it's up to you. You figure out how you want to allocate budget and get to that demo number. No MQL, no SQL, no subjective bullshit. It's very simple.
Yeah,
And then the reason we have the email database is because we know it takes a while to get people to be educated and informed and even understand what incrementality is. And so that's the long game. And saying just demos is not going to cut it. We have to constantly increase our database to be able to generate the demos next quarter and the quarter after that and so on and so forth.
sure.
So I think it's a cop out when people say no data. I think it's more about know which data matters and that start there.
Love it. This was fun. I feel like I learned a ton. And for those listening, I'm on this Attribution Odyssey this month. Like I said earlier at the start of this conversation, it's just come up so often, especially around mobile attribution. And I think my dream over the next month is to create a pretty solid playbook of, hey, if you find yourself in one of these positions from series, seed all the way up to series D, here are kind of basic expectations for telemetry. Here are kind of basic expectations for, measurement and attribution. And here are basic expectations about how to answer questions and allocate dollars. Because I think to me, that's where people get stuck is they're crossing these wires and they're saying they think that if they solve the telemetry problem, they'll have the answer to the attribution problem. And I'm just not convinced because you will never have perfect data. Like that's why I asked that question before is like, is some data better than none? Or like what is good enough?
It is
Right?
such a subjective answer, and I say to everybody, somebody in your marketing team needs to intimately understand how the marketing world works outside of like campaigns and creative and content, and has to have this like scientific way of thinking. And if you don't have somebody who has a scientific way of thinking on your team, you have a major skill issue. You have a skill gap, and you need to go fix that. All right,
Totally.
let's talk about that was way too serious for our
I
usual.
know. This is great though, because I mean, I honestly think, most growth marketers out there are dealing with this right now. So hopefully
Tell
this
me about
helpful.
it.
We'll hear.
Yes.
Maybe people were bored out of their mind. They'll tell us never do this again.
Let's find out. Okay, the major news of this week was the first ever ad placement on an AI surface appearing through Google Direct Offers. Have you read much about this?
Oh.
Do you know what this is?
No.
Okay. So what Google is saying is they've got this AI mode, right? So I think there's AI mode and AI overviews. So essentially what they're saying
Right
is
right below the surface.
whenever yeah, exactly. So whenever you are in any of the AI surfaces that Google has, and there's a very high intent query from a consumer, um, and if that's happening in those two modes, AI overviews or AI mode, advertisers can now place what is called a direct offer. A direct offer, it's very constrained for the time being. It is only, I think, for e-com type of merchants, and it is literally a price offer. So you're doing a 5% off or a 10% off or, buy 2 for 1 or whatever else. So these are price offers. They're starting with price offers, and it's only going to be targeted towards high intent queries. Now, how does Google know that it's a high intent query? We don't know. They're doing their own determination of saying, is it a high intent query? Is there intent purchase? But I have to assume that Google's pretty good at figuring that shit out. And so they're going to match up. So you have to opt in as an advertiser. You have to create these offers, and then they will show up programmatically in these surfaces. And the rationale was really interesting. What Google is saying is like, hey, if you're in research mode, right, when you're researching a lot of different things, and whether it's search or AI, that's not where these things are going to show up. These things are going to show up when you're very high intent, you're ready to make a purchase, and here's an offer right then and there to capture that intent and get you that customer. So it has begun. Ads are now in AI. And we're going to start seeing some crazy stuff happen. I am excited, but also kind of intrigued that they chose pricing promotions as the first version of this. It can be scary because basically you're just discounting. Maybe those people would have come to you anyway. So, it's an incrementality nightmare, but I will tell you, everybody in the marketing world is going to be trying these out for the next like 3 months. So fun times.
And you should, right? Because I mean, new channels often are where you find the most growth.
Yep. So that's the big
Um,
news of the week.
I can I can see it. Like, imagine, well, the high intent piece is confusing. Like, we don't know what they mean by high intent, but like, I'm just thinking to myself, what's something I love? I love Vori, the clothing line Vori. So I type into Google Vori Ponto T-shirt, right? And in today's world, the first thing at the top will be a paid ad for Vori. Like, they're probably doing branded keywords, so they're wasting money there anyways. Now you're gonna have it maybe an AI banner at the top that, well, actually, yeah, I don't know. It depends on what they mean by intent, right? Like, if you're actively searching for a brand, is it better for them to just show the direct SEO ad, right? Or if you're searching for like, hey, athletic wear that CEOs dress in, right? And then it thinks that you like Vori or you search for Vori, so then it makes an offer for Vori. That could be interesting, right? Because if you're searching for something, especially if you're searching for products that you don't know and you haven't discovered, they're incentivizing you to try something. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see, like, exactly how the algo works. My gut is because there's search and AI both, right? You're always logged into your Google account. You probably go on some type of a search, pattern for a few days or a few weeks. And
hmm
then you do some final, in AI mode, you've whittled everything down. You're down to like two or three things, and you run an AI query to say, hey, compare. I just bought some Flux footwear, some Flux shoes. And I might say, like, hey, compare the Flux running shoes to the Vivo running shoes. And then it just shows me an offer right then and there. Right. Because it knows that, okay, I'm planning for a marathon and I've done a whole bunch of research and I've been actively thinking about this. I bought some other gear for running, and okay, it's the right time to present this offer because Flux has these offer ads, direct offers in for AI mode, right? So I think it's going to be something like that. But again, it's so early days, but it's exciting. It's a new type of ad inventory, good opportunity for people to try stuff out. I'm still just like, I think it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be incremental. Like I just don't know. I just don't know because it's all pricing related. I wish they had thought of something else to start off because it encourages the wrong behavior in my opinion, which is discounting.
100%. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see, right? But what's funny is even though it's kind of objectively bad, people are still going to try it.
True, 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 true. All right. Okay. So on that note, we went super long this one. This was fun to chat about attribution. I got a chance to geek out. But we have a lot more news to cover next week. Austin, congrats on A to B and Replit, and we know you're going to crush it. And everybody, tune in again next week. Leave us a little rating if you like us, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.